mean, being too competitive, I think, sometimes is a bad thing. I don't think it's being competitive in your work is so bad. I think if you get too competitive in other things outside of your work, uh, that can be a hazard, because then you might not enjoy them as much as you should.
Every single day, new secrets from Hollywood's golden age come crawling out of the shadows, and wow, some of them will leave you speechless. If you're into uncovering what really went down behind the glitz and glam, make sure you hit subscribe. It's free, and your support keeps these untold stories alive. Johnny Carson, the king of late-night TV, once dropped a bombshell that shook fans everywhere. He exposed 9 guests from his golden era who he claimed were actually evil. For 3 decades, Carson ruled American living rooms, chatting with the biggest names in showbiz. His charming grin and smooth laugh made everyone feel like they were watching old pals swapping stories on the couch. But once the cameras went dark and the crowd filed out, that friendly smile often faded fast. According to people who knew him best, America's favorite host had a secret list, a mental blacklist of stars he couldn't stand. Johnny was the ultimate professional on camera, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked by his side for over 10 years. But the second we cut to commercial, he'd lean over to Ed and whisper, "That person should never be near a camera or a child." Shocking, right? In his later years, Carson reportedly stopped holding back. He opened up to close friends about the celebrities he secretly despised. And the tales he told painted a chilling picture of Hollywood icons who hid monstrous behavior behind perfect smiles. One of the most jaw-dropping stories involved a legendary actress who played the sweet and innocent type on his show. But backstage, she allegedly snapped. She tore into a young production assistant so harshly that security had to rush in to stop her. And then there was the beloved male star who Carson supposedly caught doing something so disturbing in his dressing room that the host almost called the police. Unbelievable. These weren't just moody stars or high-maintenance divas. No way. Johnny Carson claimed these were truly dark souls hiding behind fame, charm, and flashing lights. Predators, manipulators, and abusers that Hollywood quietly protected for years.
As soon as people found out that he was an alcoholic and had emotional problems, and in fact was dependent on alcohol, then I think that would be a cheap shot to take.
But to really understand what Carson meant, we've got to start with the very first name on his secret list, the one that triggered his deepest disgust and led to a tense backstage showdown no one ever talked about, until now. Well, first of all, I'm stage-struck, and I think they all know that. Secondly, I try to get a film that has audience identification. Those were the polished words of Joan Crawford, the so-called Hollywood queen with ice running through her veins. When Crawford graced The Tonight Show in 1970, audiences saw pure elegance, flawless posture, glowing skin, and that confident, almost regal smile. She was the picture of old-school glamour. But behind the stage lights, a totally different story was unfolding. According to several Tonight Show staff members, Crawford's off-camera attitude was nothing short of chilling. She was one of the coldest people I've ever interviewed, Carson reportedly told his biographer years later. It was like talking to a beautiful statue, perfect on the outside, but empty inside. And the drama started before she even set foot in the studio. Her team sent over a list of demands so extreme, it's legendary among the old staff. She wanted everything controlled down to the tiniest details, lighting, camera angles, and even the exact temperature of the room. One former producer remembered, everything had to be exact. The tilt of her chair, the height of Johnny's desk, even the air had to be 67 degrees. Not 66, not 68, exactly 67. Can you imagine that level of control? Not even a degree off. 67, not 68. When Joan Crawford finally arrived, a full 3 hours before the taping, she didn't just stroll in quietly. She came with her own glam squad, ignoring the fact that The Tonight Show already had award-winning makeup artists waiting. But what really showed her true colors wasn't the diva treatment. It was how she treated people, depending on who they were. She practically curtsied to Johnny, said a stagehand who was there that day. But when a young production assistant accidentally walked into her dressing room with the water she'd asked for, all hell broke loose. According to several witnesses, Crawford exploded into a verbal storm so intense that everyone in the hallway froze in disbelief. She allegedly tore into the assistant, a young woman just starting her career, calling her a brainless little tramp and sneering that she should find work at a brothel where incompetence might actually be an asset. The poor girl ran off in tears while Crawford demanded she be fired on the spot. But Carson's producer refused, and the tension that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. You could feel the chill in the air all through the taping. Still, the most haunting part of that night wasn't even Crawford's cruel outburst. It was what came next. Witnesses say she transformed the instant the cameras turned on. She was like a machine pretending to be a woman, one producer remembered. Every word, every giggle, every expression, all rehearsed. Nothing was real. During commercial breaks, Crawford's face would drop completely. Gone was the charming Hollywood queen. She'd just sit there, frozen and silent, staring into space while the crew avoided eye contact. Then, as soon as that red light flashed back on, boom! The smile returned, the laughter flowed, and she was back to playing America's favorite star, flipping a switch. Creepy, right? Johnny Carson, the man who could make anyone feel at ease on stage, met his match with Joan Crawford. He just couldn't break through that icy wall. After the show, he reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and muttered, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Ouch. Years later, when Christina Crawford's explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest, hit the shelves, revealing Joan's alleged abuse toward her adopted children, Carson wasn't shocked at all. According to his close friends, he simply nodded and said, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." That line sent chills through Hollywood. But if Crawford's coldness rattled Carson, his next adversary on the list represented something far worse, a dangerous kind of power that thrived on fear and control. I can answer that by telling you that in those lovely moments, I play DNES and Chloe. Those were the soft-spoken words of Frank Sinatra, the charming, tough guy who ruled Hollywood's social scene with swagger and steel. But Carson saw right through the polished act. To him, Sinatra wasn't just old Blue Eyes. He was a man who used his fame like a weapon. On screen, the two looked like pals, laughing, trading stories, and keeping the audience entertained. Sinatra would crack jokes, sing a few lines, and Carson would flash that signature smile, acting like everything was fine. But behind the curtain, it was a whole different story. Insiders say Carson couldn't stand Sinatra's behavior once the cameras stopped rolling. It wasn't about his music. Carson respected the man's talent. It was about how he treated people he thought didn't matter. One crew member recalled Carson whispering, "If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer." That one comment said it all. Behind that silky voice and effortless charm, there was a side of Sinatra that scared even Johnny Carson. Carson once confided to a close friend, and this has been backed up by multiple biographies, "Sometimes I think he was both," referring to Sinatra's mix of charm and intimidation. And wow, that says a lot coming from Johnny. Whenever Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show, the crew braced themselves because chaos was coming with him. According to longtime staff members, Sinatra never showed up alone. He'd roll in with an entourage of up to 8 men. And these weren't Hollywood types in tailored suits. Nope. One crew member said they looked like guys you wouldn't want to meet in an alley. The minute they arrived, they spread across the studio, standing silent and watchful. One cameraman later said it felt like being under surveillance. Creepy, right? But what disturbed Carson the most wasn't just their presence. It was Sinatra's treatment of the people around him. If he thought someone was beneath him, he didn't hide it. During one taping in the early 70s, a floor manager gave the standard 3-minute warning before Sinatra's segment. Big mistake. Witnesses say Sinatra grabbed the poor guy by his tie, yanked him close, and growled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, was left pale and shaken, his hands trembling as he stepped away. Carson, watching the whole thing unfold from his office monitor, was furious. For a moment, he nearly pulled the plug on the segment completely. But the show's producer reminded him how massive the ratings would be with Sinatra on the couch, and Carson reluctantly gave in. Even then, the tension never left the room. And if that wasn't enough, Sinatra's reliability drove everyone crazy. He had a habit of canceling at the last possible moment, sometimes just hours before showtime. One time, he was already in the building, but suddenly decided he wasn't in the mood and walked right out. Imagine the panic that caused backstage. The man ran on his own time, and nobody, not even Johnny Carson, could tell him otherwise. The real breaking point came during a commercial break, and it shocked everyone in the studio. Sinatra, feeling untouchable as always, made a cruel remark about a female staff member's looks, loud enough for nearby crew to hear. That was the moment Johnny Carson snapped his cool on-air persona and cut in cold as ice. "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The entire room froze. You could feel the tension buzzing in the air. Sinatra stared, clearly stunned that anyone, especially Johnny Carson, had dared to call him out. The red light came back on, the cameras rolled, and both men instantly slipped back into performance mode like nothing had happened. But the crew could tell something had changed. Carson's questions got noticeably shorter, his tone distant, his smile a little tighter. The warmth was gone. After that uncomfortable taping, Carson reportedly turned to his producer and said, "I don't care what his ratings are. Limit him to once a year, maximum." That statement hit hard, because Carson never meddled in guest bookings. The fact that he wanted Sinatra restricted said everything. He was done with the singer's attitude. Behind that perfect late-night composure, Johnny had drawn a line that even Frank Sinatra couldn't cross. Sinatra to Carson was the ultimate example of celebrity arrogance, power used to push people around and make them feel small. But the next name on Carson's secret list was a whole different breed of difficult. This next star wasn't about intimidation. He was about ego so massive it couldn't fit in the studio. Now, the argument against what I'm saying is that the world is full. All the best young directors are soaked. Those with the rambling, self-assured words of Orson Welles, the cinematic genius who believed rules didn't apply to him. Carson thought he'd seen it all, but Welles proved that genius and arrogance could be a dangerous mix. Orson Welles was a frequent face on The Tonight Show during Carson's reign, and every time he appeared, he owned the room. With that thunderous voice, grand presence, and those wild tales from his legendary career, audiences watching at home were completely mesmerized. They saw a charming genius, a brilliant storyteller, a living piece of Hollywood history. But behind the curtain, Carson and his crew saw something totally different. A man whose ego had gotten so massive, he thought the rules of television just didn't apply to him anymore. After one particularly painful episode, Carson reportedly sighed and muttered, "Never again. That guy thinks he's still running Rome." That line became a running joke in the studio. But there was real frustration behind it. The trouble always started before Welles even stepped foot on set. According to several Tonight Show writers, Welles flat out refused to use the prepared questions or talking points that Carson's team worked so hard on. One writer remembered, "He told us our questions were pedestrian and obvious. Then he literally crossed them all out and handed the page back, completely blank." That kind of attitude threw the entire team off balance and left Johnny scrambling. Imagine having to interview one of cinema's biggest icons, totally unscripted, no guide, and no clue where he was headed next. That was Carson's nightmare. Welles would go off on these endless dramatic tangents, weaving half-hour stories about his genius days that were nearly impossible to edit down for airtime. One night in the mid-1970s, it got especially bad. Welles was supposed to be on for just 7 minutes, a tight, fun segment. Instead, he planted himself on the couch and talked for 25 minutes straight. Carson gave all his usual cues, the polite nods, the subtle watch check, even the light tap on his cue cards. But Welles didn't care. He just kept going, completely ignoring every signal. By the time the cameras finally cut to commercial, the crew was exhausted, and Carson's expression said it all. pure disbelief. Orson Welles wasn't just a guest that night. He'd practically hijacked the entire show. When time started slipping away, chaos hit the control room. The director later explained, Welles saw every signal we gave him and just kept talking. Things got so bad that they had to bump 2 other guests from the lineup entirely. That night became infamous behind the scenes as the Orson takeover. But Welles's behavior off camera was just as unbearable. Crew members said he treated staff like servants from another era, cold, dismissive, and full of himself. He reportedly refused to speak directly to production assistants, even when they were standing right next to him. Instead, he'd wave a hand and say things like, "Tell the girl I need more water," or "Ask the boy to adjust the light." The disrespect was unreal. What really pushed Carson's buttons, though, was how Welles treated The Tonight Show like it was his own personal stage. According to multiple staffers, he'd stroll in with random props, switch topics mid-conversation without warning, and even try to direct the camera crew while sitting on the couch. One former producer couldn't believe it. He actually stood up once and started telling our camera operators which angles to shoot from. You can bet Johnny was furious. After that episode, Carson's patience officially ran out. He reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and said, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." That line became a quiet mantra among the crew, a reminder that even legends could go too far. Carson, who was a total perfectionist about timing and production flow, took Welles's disregard for television structure as a personal insult. To him, live TV was an art form, and Welles treated it like a playground for his ego. Though Johnny always kept things professional on air, those close to him said he never looked at Orson Welles the same way again. Publicly, he praised Welles's genius. Privately, he saw him as a warning, proof that when ego outgrows talent, even greatness starts to crumble. If Orson Welles was a test of ego control, then Carson's next nightmare guest brought an entirely different storm. Wild, unpredictable energy that could flip from charm to hostility in seconds. Failed out in light bulbs, and I mean besides something called a temperament, she once joked. That woman was none other than Bette Davis, Hollywood's undisputed queen of verbal violence. When Bette Davis graced The Tonight Show, the audience saw the star they adored. Witty, sharp-tongued, and dripping with that old-school class. She told captivating Hollywood stories in her famous, raspy voice, still fierce and commanding even in her later years. But what viewers didn't see was the chaos before and after the cameras rolled, moments that showed a much darker side of the silver screen icon. According to staff members, her temper could snap like a whip. The second something didn't go her way, the temperature in the studio dropped fast. Carson himself, usually calm no matter the guest, was visibly shaken after one particularly rough taping. He reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and muttered, "She doesn't need a stage. She needs a courtroom. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." The crew quickly learned that Davis didn't just dominate the spotlight. She devoured it. Multiple Tonight Show staffers recalled how, during episodes featuring multiple celebrities, she would constantly interrupt or talk over her fellow guests, especially younger stars or women. If someone else dared to speak too long, Davis would cut in mid-sentence with that famous glare that could freeze a room. One producer remembered she'd literally turn her back on other guests right there on the couch like they didn't exist. That kind of attitude made even seasoned entertainers uncomfortable, and Johnny Carson had to work double time just to keep the show on track. To the audience, Bette Davis was dazzling, fierce, funny, and impossible to ignore. But to the people working behind the scenes, she was something else entirely, a Hollywood legend who treated every conversation like a battle she had to win. A former Tonight Show talent coordinator once said, if someone else got a big laugh, you could actually see Bette Davis seething, plotting her next move to steal the spotlight back. That's how fiercely competitive she was. But what went on behind the scenes made things even more chaotic. Before every taping, Davis reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room, not too unusual for old Hollywood guests. But her drinking sometimes crossed the line. Crew members from the 1970s said that once the drink started flowing, her filter disappeared. According to several female staffers, Davis would make comments that left people stunned, using sexist and racially insensitive language that was shocking even for that time. One makeup artist remembered a particularly cruel encounter. She said Davis looked her over and snapped, "Get me someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drunk." That remark cut deep, and the room went silent. It was clear that when Bet was in a mood, nobody was safe. Johnny Carson, who almost never confronted guests directly, finally had enough during a rehearsal one afternoon. Davis started tearing into a cue card holder, complaining that he was too slow. The moment was so tense that crew members froze until Carson calmly but firmly stepped forward. "Ms. Davis," he told her quietly, "on this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." The entire studio went silent. The production assistant who witnessed the moment said she was stunned. You could tell she wasn't used to being called out, especially not by someone like Johnny. But to everyone's surprise, Bet actually backed down. For once, the queen of verbal violence had no comeback. What made Bet Davis such a complicated guest for Carson wasn't just her outbursts. It was the contradiction. She was brilliant, undeniably talented, a living legend whose films Johnny genuinely admired. But her behavior made working with her exhausting. After her final Tonight Show appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly turned to his producer and sighed, "That's the last time. Life's too short to spend it being verbally flogged by Bet Davis." It was the perfect Carson mix of humor and truth. And everyone who'd been there that night quietly agreed. No matter how many Oscars she had, at least Bet Davis aimed her fire at adults who could fight back. But Johnny Carson's next difficult guest crossed a far more troubling line. Behavior that made everyone in the studio deeply uncomfortable, especially the young women working behind the scenes. Some do. "Oh, sure, I'm gonna make us strong and tall," he once joked awkwardly. That guest was none other than Mickey Rooney, the aging child star with wandering hands. Mickey Rooney was once Hollywood royalty, a true box office king between 1939 and 1941, and one of the last living links to the golden age of cinema. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been joyful, nostalgic tributes to his legendary career. Instead, they became infamous among Carson's crew for all the wrong reasons. Unpredictable behavior, off-the-rails energy, and more than a few troubling moments that left the staff uneasy. "He thinks being short gives him license to be a creep," Carson reportedly muttered to his producer after one especially tense taping in the mid-1970s. By that point, Rooney was in his mid-50s and had developed a reputation among female staff for behavior that crossed professional lines. According to multiple crew accounts, young production assistants would quietly ask to be reassigned whenever they found out Rooney was coming in. One former assistant from the late 70s remembered it vividly. He'd grab your hand when you brought him water, pull you a little closer, and ask if you were married. If you tried to step back, she said, he'd hold onto your wrist just a little too long. There was a nervous, awkward tension whenever he was around. The kind of discomfort that couldn't be ignored but was hard to call out in that era. Some staff described him as charming one minute, inappropriate the next. For Carson, who prided himself on keeping his show classy and comfortable for everyone, Rooney's behavior was unacceptable. After one too many incidents, he reportedly told his team that if the studio ever booked Mickey again, he wanted extra eyes everywhere. It was clear Johnny had seen enough of Hollywood's darker side, and this time it hit too close to home. What made things even worse was Mickey Rooney's inability, or unwillingness, to realize when he'd had way too much to drink. According to Tonight Show staff, he appeared visibly intoxicated during at least 3 separate tapings. He'd slur his words, lose his train of thought mid-sentence, and drift off into rambling stories that went nowhere. One unforgettable moment came in 1977. Rooney started sharing what was supposed to be a touching story about Judy Garland, but it quickly veered into inappropriate territory, leaving the studio audience stunned. Carson, always the consummate professional, immediately stepped in and steered the conversation somewhere safer before things got worse. During the commercial break, he reportedly turned to his producer and whispered, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" You could tell Johnny was torn between frustration and disbelief. Part of what made Rooney such a headache for Carson was the massive generational divide between them. Born in 1920, Mickey came from an era of Hollywood where certain behaviors, especially toward women, were brushed off or even accepted. A longtime Tonight Show director explained it best. Johnny wasn't uptight, but he had boundaries. He expected everyone to act professionally. Rooney just didn't seem to get that. When staff tried to correct him, he acted confused, almost as if he couldn't understand why people were upset. That cluelessness made the whole situation even more uncomfortable. He wasn't just crossing lines, he didn't even seem to see them. During one particularly rough taping, Rooney made repeated remarks about a young actress who was also appearing on the show that night. The comments were so awkward that Carson personally pulled her aside after the show to apologize. One director remembered, "I'd never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest's behavior. He told her, 'That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again.'" That moment said everything about Carson's character. Behind the charm and the jokes, he had a strong sense of decency. And when someone violated that, even a Hollywood legend like Mickey Rooney, he didn't hesitate to draw the line. True to his word, Johnny Carson made sure Mickey Rooney's appearances became few and far between as the late 1970s rolled into the 80s. Whenever the studio did book him, Carson reportedly insisted those segments be taped in the daytime, not live at night, just in case things went off the rails again. But if Rooney's chaos caused awkward tension, Carson's next guest took things to a whole new level. A diva so demanding that her requests became legendary among the Tonight Show staff. "I don't see. My last marriage was one day, and I didn't think it would last that," she once joked with a sparkle in her eye. That was Zsa Gabor, the glamorous hurricane who could charm a crowd while driving Johnny Carson absolutely crazy. With her dramatic accent, endless confidence, and love of luxury, Zsa was pure Hollywood spectacle. She was one of the Tonight Show's most frequent guests, dozens of appearances that always guaranteed laughs and drama in equal measure. To the audience, she was a charming, flirty socialite who turned every interview into a performance. But behind the curtain, staff members had another word for her: exhausting. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson once quipped after one especially draining show. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting. That line summed it up perfectly. Her list of pre-show demands was stuff of legend. According to former employees, Gabor sent over a checklist every single time she was booked. The temperature in her dressing room, exactly 74 degrees. Fresh flowers, only orchids, no carnations allowed. She wanted Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, not 2, not 4. And as if that wasn't enough, she also demanded that her own lighting technician be flown in at the show's expense. And it didn't stop there. Gabor reportedly insisted that no female guests under 40 be booked on the same episode as her. One producer laughed years later, saying, "We spent more time managing her list than planning the actual show." Zsa Gabor may have been dazzling on camera, but behind the scenes, her diva reputation was unmatched. And even Johnny Carson, who'd handled everyone from Frank Sinatra to Bette Davis, once said she was one of the toughest guests he ever faced. Her list of demands was so over the top, it sounded like a comedy sketch. Her rider read like a parody of celebrity behavior, one former talent coordinator laughed. "We honestly thought it was a joke the first time we got it." But Zsa Gabor was dead serious. And when her needs weren't met down to the tiniest detail, she'd refuse to leave her dressing room, no matter who was waiting. According to staff, she'd lock herself in until every crisis was handled, even if that meant throwing the entire taping schedule into chaos. Crews would scramble, producers would panic, and Johnny would be pacing backstage trying to keep the show from falling apart. One of the wildest incidents happened when Gabor showed up and realized the makeup team didn't have her favorite brand of foundation. Witnesses said she completely lost her cool. yelling at the head makeup artist and demanding someone drive to Beverly Hills immediately to buy the right product. The studio froze in disbelief. Johnny finally had to step in himself. A former producer recalled the moment clearly. He actually called her directly and said something like, "Za, honey, you already look gorgeous, and we've got a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." Only Carson could pull off that mix of charm and exasperation. What really got under Johnny's skin wasn't just her tantrums. It was how her drama threw the entire production into disarray. Other guests would be stuck waiting in the green room. The crew would have to stay late, and the show's tight schedule would be completely wrecked. All because Zaza didn't like her lighting or her lipstick. After one especially bad taping, when she arrived 40 minutes late and complained about how she was introduced, Carson finally hit his limit. He reportedly turned to his executive producer and said, "Next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show starring Zaza Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick." That line spread through the studio like wildfire. Even the crew couldn't help but laugh. Zaza had gotten under Johnny's skin more than almost anyone, and that was saying something. Despite all the drama she caused backstage, Zaza Gabor kept coming back to The Tonight Show. Proof that when the cameras started rolling, she was pure gold. Carson might have been exasperated behind the scenes, but even he knew she could light up a room and pull in viewers. Still, once the diva dust settled, Johnny's next troublesome guest brought a very different challenge, the kind that could turn a fun, breezy chat into an all-out verbal explosion. Enter Shelley Winters, Hollywood's unpredictable powder keg, a two-time Oscar winner with decades of iconic roles behind her. Shelley had the kind of resume most stars could only dream of. From her glamorous early days to her gritty later roles, she was a powerhouse. On paper, she should have been the perfect guest, talented, outspoken, and full of old Hollywood tales. But in reality, she was chaos wrapped in a cocktail dress. "Shelley doesn't talk, she detonates," Carson reportedly said after one particularly wild appearance, and that pretty much summed her up. Among Tonight Show staff, she became infamous for being one of the hardest guests to handle, not because she was mean or demanding, but because nobody ever knew which Shelley would show up. Producers would prep fun, light-hearted questions about her latest film, hoping for laughs and stories. But Shelley didn't play by late-night rules. Instead of the usual Hollywood chatter, she'd dive headfirst into heavy territory, fiery political rants, emotional confessions, or intense personal stories that stopped Johnny dead in his tracks. One staff member recalled an unforgettable night in the mid-1970s. Carson casually asked her about a recent movie, just a standard question. And Shelley launched into a 5-minute monologue about government corruption, completely ignoring his attempts to steer things back on track. The studio audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent, and Johnny was left desperately searching for a light-hearted way to cut to commercial without making things worse. Carson was famous for keeping calm under pressure. He could handle anyone from Sinatra to Wells. But when Shelley Winters got going, even Johnny's legendary charm couldn't control the storm. It was like trying to steer a tornado, recalled one former Tonight Show director. Once she got going, all Johnny could do was hang on and wait for her to burn herself out. Shelley Winters' unpredictability didn't just stop at what came out of her mouth. It extended to her actions, too. She had a reputation for fiery outbursts that kept everyone on edge. One infamous story, not from Carson's show, but a British talk show, became legendary. After a fellow guest, actor Oliver Reed, made a sexist remark, Shelley calmly picked up her drink and threw a glass of whiskey right in his face. That was Shelley in a nutshell, unfiltered, fearless, and totally unpredictable. So when she was scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show, the staff would brace for impact. "We'd actually clear the set before she arrived," a former stage manager admitted. "Anything that could be thrown or knocked over, glasses, mugs, even decorative props, we'd quietly move out of reach." Everyone knew that when Shelley was in the building, anything could happen. But here's the thing. Unlike some of Carson's other difficult guests, Shelley Winters wasn't cruel, egotistical, or manipulative. Her chaos didn't come from malice. It came from passion. She truly cared about what she was talking about. politics, social change, the state of the world, and she wasn't about to tone it down just because she was on late-night TV. Every interview was a mission for her, even if it made the room tense. Carson, ever the professional, often looked visibly uncomfortable when her energy spiked, but deep down, he respected her conviction. After one fiery appearance where Winters tore into the Vietnam War with raw emotion, Johnny reportedly turned to his producer and sighed. "I may not want to vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says." That was Johnny's way of giving credit where it was due. Shelley Winters might have been a powder keg, but she was also real. And in a world full of fake smiles and rehearsed answers, even Johnny Carson couldn't help but respect that kind of honesty. As time went on, Shelley Winters' visits to The Tonight Show became fewer and fewer. Carson eventually preferred guests whose energy flowed with the show's rhythm, not against it. While Shelley's passionate, unpredictable nature made for unforgettable TV, Johnny's next difficult guest was a whole different story. One that hit him on a personal level. This time, the problem wasn't ego or chaos. It was politics. "I like big muscles and red core puzzles. I like beautiful Jane Russell," she once declared in that unmistakable Hollywood drawl. Jane Russell, the stunning brunette bombshell of the 1940s and 50s, was one of cinema's most recognizable icons. Known for The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she was the kind of classic movie star who seemed made for Carson's couch, gorgeous, confident, and full of old Hollywood glamour. But looks can be deceiving. Behind that sparkling smile and sultry charm was a side of Russell that Carson quietly found hard to stomach. After a handful of appearances in the early 1970s, she stopped being invited back, and insiders say the decision came straight from Johnny himself. According to several Tonight Show staffers, Carson grew increasingly uncomfortable with Russell's extreme political views and her reported behavior toward LGBTQ+ employees working behind the scenes. One former writer explained that Russell would sometimes use backstage moments to push harsh opinions that clashed with the show's open, friendly environment. Carson, who identified as a moderate Republican for much of his life, wasn't opposed to differing opinions. In fact, he liked a good debate. But he had one firm rule. Politics on The Tonight Show should never turn divisive or cruel. Johnny could handle guests having different political opinions, one producer said. What he couldn't handle was when those opinions targeted people who didn't deserve it. That's what made Jane Russell so difficult for him. On camera, she was every bit the Hollywood goddess audiences adored, witty, flirtatious, and camera-ready. But off-camera, her hardline views and cold remarks about certain staff members created tension that Johnny couldn't ignore. By the mid-1970s, her name quietly vanished from the booking list. And while Carson never spoke publicly about why, those who worked closest to him said it wasn't a scheduling issue. It was a moral one. What truly crossed the line for Johnny Carson wasn't Jane Russell's conservative opinions. It was when those views turned personal, spilling over into attacks on people who worked on or appeared on The Tonight Show. According to multiple former staff members, Russell gained an uncomfortable reputation for making disparaging comments about LGBTQ+ individuals working behind the scenes. During one early 1970s taping, she reportedly refused to let a gay makeup artist touch her face, demanding a replacement on the spot. Crew members were stunned. It was blatant and humiliating. For Carson, who treated his staff like family, that kind of behavior was unacceptable. But the situation grew even worse when another star entered the picture, Rock Hudson. According to a talent coordinator who worked closely on the show's bookings, Russell flat out refused to appear on the same episode as Hudson, making cruel remarks about his sexuality. Though Hudson hadn't publicly come out, his orientation was quietly known throughout Hollywood circles. To Johnny, her reaction wasn't just mean, it was disgraceful. Johnny had a lot of friends in the gay community, including people on his own crew, the coordinator explained. He was ahead of his time when it came to that stuff. He didn't tolerate discrimination, not on his stage, not on his watch. The final straw came in 1973 during what would become Russell's last Tonight Show appearance. Between segments, when the cameras were off and the commercial break rolled, she reportedly made dismissive remarks about civil rights legislation. comments that several nearby staffers overheard. While her mic was off, word spread fast backstage, and it didn't take long for those remarks to reach Carson. When Johnny found out, he was furious. That moment, insiders say, was the end of Jane Russell's time on The Tonight Show. From that night forward, her name disappeared from the booking sheets, not by coincidence, but by Carson's direct order. It was one of the few known instances where Johnny personally banned a guest. And those close to him said it wasn't about ratings or image. It was about principle. To Carson, kindness and respect weren't optional. They were the foundation of his show. No amount of glamour or star power could make him overlook cruelty, not even from one of Hollywood's most iconic faces. What made the Jane Russell situation so striking wasn't just her behavior. It was how far Johnny Carson was willing to go to take a stand against it. He almost never banned guests outright, especially ones with Russell's kind of Hollywood legacy and name recognition. For Carson to make that call said everything. He wasn't just uncomfortable, he was disgusted. Her words had crossed a moral line he couldn't ignore. But while Russell's political rants and backstage cruelty left a lasting mark on Carson, there was one celebrity who stirred an even deeper resentment. Someone Johnny reportedly couldn't stand both on and off the camera. This was the guest he described as truly hateful. That man was Jerry Lewis. I've never asked you this, but I'm asking you now, simply, purely. Hold it. That odd moment from an old Carson interview now feels symbolic, because behind the scenes, things between the two comedians were anything but simple. Jerry Lewis was a massive star, one of America's most famous entertainers. He wasn't just a comedian, he was an actor, filmmaker, and humanitarian. His manic energy and slapstick style revolutionized comedy, and his annual telethons for muscular dystrophy research turned him into a beloved national figure. But those who worked behind the curtain told a very different story. According to multiple Tonight Show staff accounts, Jerry Lewis was one of the most difficult, demeaning celebrities ever to set foot in the studio. Off stage, he reportedly treated production crews and assistants with condescension and disrespect, snapping at people who didn't meet his impossible standards. For a man who played lovable goofballs on screen, his real-life persona could be shockingly cruel. He's what happens when ego outruns talent, Carson reportedly told a colleague after one especially miserable taping in the mid-1970s. That comment, sharp as it was, came from a place of real frustration. Johnny had built his career on treating guests, even the eccentric ones, with fairness and charm. But Jerry Lewis tested that patience like no one else. To the world, Jerry was a comic genius. To the people who worked with him day to day, he was something entirely different, a man whose arrogance overshadowed his art. And for Johnny Carson, that kind of hypocrisy was the one thing he could never stand. Unlike some of Carson's more difficult guests, who saved their bad behavior for the crew, Jerry Lewis didn't even bother hiding his contempt. Not from anyone, not even Johnny himself. During one especially infamous Tonight Show taping, Lewis went completely off the rails. He constantly interrupted Carson, hijacked questions meant for other guests, and turned what should have been a friendly chat into a one-man takeover. Then came the moment that really set Johnny off. Without warning, Lewis reached across the desk and adjusted Carson's tie. The audience laughed awkwardly, thinking it was part of the act. But those who knew Johnny could see it instantly. He was furious. Johnny hated people touching him without permission, a former producer explained. It was a well-known rule. You don't touch Johnny unless he's the one to initiate it. Lewis knew that, and he did it anyway. It was a power move. But Jerry's arrogance didn't stop there. His behavior toward the production team was even worse. Multiple former staffers described how he refused to learn anyone's name, referring to them instead as, "Hey, you, camera guy, or makeup girl," no matter how experienced or respected they were. To him, everyone behind the scenes was beneath his notice. One story became infamous among the crew. During a rehearsal, a veteran camera operator coughed quietly, just once. According to several witnesses, Lewis abruptly stopped the run-through, turned toward the man, and began screaming. He called the guy a professional who breathes like an amateur and demanded that he be kicked out of the studio, a stunned floor manager later confirmed. Jerry screamed at a camera op for breathing, loudly, not talking. Breathing. The poor guy had allergies. By that point, Carson's patience was gone. What infuriated him most wasn't just Jerry's rudeness, it was the hypocrisy. On camera and in public, Lewis was celebrated as a tireless humanitarian, the smiling face of charity who raised millions for children in need. But backstage, his behavior toward people who couldn't advance his career painted a completely different picture. That contrast between the beloved public figure and the bully behind closed doors was something Johnny Carson simply couldn't stand. He respected professionalism, even in big personalities, but cruelty disguised as comedy was unforgivable. The man raises money for sick kids, one staffer recalled Johnny saying after the show. And then he turns around and screams at a cameraman for breathing. That's not kindness, that's performance. From that moment on, Jerry Lewis was unofficially blacklisted. Carson never made a public statement about it. He didn't have to. Everyone at The Tonight Show knew exactly why Jerry would never be welcome back. The Jekyll and Hyde routine made Johnny's skin crawl, recalled a producer who worked closely with him. He'd watch Jerry Lewis cry on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were subhuman. That hypocrisy hit Carson on a level few others did. After Lewis's final appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Johnny reportedly turned to his executive producer and said just 2 words, never again. That was it. Simple, final, and ice cold. Though Carson almost never banned guests outright, Jerry Lewis joined that small, infamous group of celebrities who were quietly blacklisted from The Tonight Show during its final decade. The message was clear. Fame couldn't excuse cruelty. Years later, at a private dinner, someone brought up Lewis's name, and Carson's response stunned everyone at the table. Usually calm, diplomatic, and discreet, Johnny didn't hold back this time. In a town full of phonies, he reportedly said, he stands out as truly hateful. And that takes some doing. Those words rippled through the room. Harsh, yes, but deeply revealing. What Johnny Carson's personal blacklist exposed was something Hollywood rarely admitted. Beneath the polished smiles, red carpets, and rehearsed interviews, there was a darker truth. These weren't just tough personalities. They were powerful figures whose fame often shielded bad behavior. The 9 names Johnny singled out, Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Bette Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zaza Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis, formed an unintentional hall of fame for Hollywood's hidden chaos. Each one represented a different side of what Carson quietly despised about show business. Ego without empathy, fame without decency, and charm that vanished when the lights went out. A longtime Tonight Show producer summed it up perfectly. For 30 years, every major star in America had to go through Johnny Carson to reach the public. He saw who was genuine and who was faking it. Unlike gossip reporters chasing headlines or bitter insiders trying to settle scores, Johnny had nothing to gain by exaggerating. He was already at the top, respected, untouchable, and trusted by millions. That's what makes his opinion so powerful even decades later. Carson didn't just host Hollywood, he saw it. And what he saw, behind the glitter and the laughter, wasn't always pretty. Johnny Carson had absolutely nothing to gain by calling out these stars, and everything to lose. Criticizing Hollywood's elite could have easily backfired, especially when those same names filled his guest list and kept his ratings sky high. Johnny wasn't looking to make enemies, noted his former producer. Quite the opposite. He wanted every interview to go smoothly. If he disliked someone, it was because they'd made it impossible not to. Carson's role in the entertainment world was unlike anyone else's. Part gatekeeper, part confidant, and sometimes even therapist to the stars. For 30 years, his couch wasn't just a talk show set, it was a confessional. Celebrities came there to laugh, to promote, and often without realizing it, to reveal who they really were. That's what made Johnny's private judgments so powerful. They came from a man who'd seen both the best and worst of Hollywood, up close and unfiltered. What set Carson apart was his ability to draw a clear line between guests who were simply difficult and those who were genuinely toxic. He could tolerate nerves, eccentric behavior, even a healthy dose of ego that came with the territory. What he couldn't stomach was cruelty, arrogance, or disrespect toward people who didn't have the power to fight back. Johnny had a simple test, recalled his longtime director. He'd watch how they treated the pages, the assistants, the guys working the cameras. That told him everything he needed to know about a person's character. It was a quiet rule, but one that shaped how he viewed nearly everyone who walked through those studio doors. And as the years rolled on, Carson's private instincts started looking eerily accurate. Since his death in 2005, much of what he privately believed has been backed up by later revelations. Christina Crawford's shocking claims about her mother, Joan, long whispered stories about Sinatra's mob connections, and multiple accounts of Mickey Rooney's inappropriate behavior. All of it has since been confirmed or supported by other sources. It turns out Johnny wasn't just America's late-night host. He was also one of its sharpest judges of character. Sitting behind that desk night after night, he saw right through the act. And though he almost never said it publicly, his quiet blacklist of Hollywood's untouchables painted a far more honest portrait of fame than any magazine cover ever could. All of this shows that Johnny Carson wasn't just being judgmental. He was spot on. He saw through the polished smiles, the rehearsed lines, and the carefully crafted publicity images to recognize real character flaws that Hollywood's PR machine worked tirelessly to hide from the public eye. The most chilling part about Carson's secret blacklist isn't just who was on it, it's how easily these powerful stars were protected. Back then, the studio system was a fortress. No matter how badly someone behaved, as long as they sold tickets, everyone, from the studios to the magazines, had a reason to keep their image spotless. Today, one cell phone video could end a career, observed a former Tonight Show writer. But back then, someone could throw a chair at an assistant. And as long as they were profitable, that story would never leave the building. It's a sobering thought, especially as we look back on Hollywood's so-called golden age with rose-colored glasses. Carson's unfiltered opinions serve as a sharp reminder. Our cultural icons have always been human, complex, messy, and often deeply flawed. Some inspired millions, others disappointed fans, and a few revealed darkness so shocking it still echoes decades later. Behind the flawless makeup and the dazzling lights, there were real people, and not all of them were pretty inside. Johnny's longtime producer once recalled something he used to say often. The camera doesn't just add 10 pounds, and it adds a layer of fiction. That was Carson's gift. He didn't just interview stars. He saw through them. Beneath the laughter and the glamour, he spotted the truth the world wasn't supposed to see. And that's why his private list still fascinates people today. Because it wasn't based on gossip or grudges. It was built on first-hand experience and an uncanny ability to read people. Johnny Carson didn't expose Hollywood's secrets to the public, but he never let them fool him either. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the untold stories of Johnny Carson's most difficult guests. If this look behind the curtain of television's golden age shocked you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more forgotten Hollywood truths to light.